Okay guys, for our next lesson we're going to look at functions. We're starting to get into some actual coding structure. So far the little programs that we've written have been kind of linear. They've just been like thing, task, and really that's not really how you would want to organize a program. What you should do is isolate your functional units, your executable units as functions. So you have a little blob of code that does this and a little blob of code that does that, and you have exterior functions in those little blobs of code, and then the program itself is just a series, as much as possible, a series of function calls. So you call this function, it does its thing, returns a value. You do this function, it does its thing, returns a value, whatever's required for the program. But essentially we're going to start taking pieces of functionality outside of the main program and creating functions. We're going to try to move our plan of programming more towards an object-oriented view, which means object-oriented. We take code and we model real-world objects, and one of the things that we need to do is to work up functions. And so let's go ahead and go to the desktop. All right, so we're looking at our environment now. Let's go ahead and first of all, let's save our programming as exercise 14. And yeah, that's okay. And we're going to go ahead and go to our program Python folder, Python code, and we're going to do a dir and make sure that we can see 14. There it is. All right, so now let's look at, first of all, just a basic plain Jane function that just prints. All right, now we define the function outside of our regular code. Usually you'll define it at the top, and the keyword that we use is def. So we're going to define a function. We're going to call it my function. Don't have any parameters for this one. Just like any other block of code, after the definition we have a colon, and then we drop down and we indent. This is just like a loop, just like an if-then statement. Functions are the same basic structure. In fact, all Python's data structures are the same. Colon, drop down, indent. And then as all the code in the function needs to be indented. So we've defined the function, we've given it a name, and that's what we'll call it by. We've put parentheses after it, but we didn't put anything in the parentheses. So essentially those, there's no arguments, there's no parameters that we need to feed it, and now we can put the code in for our function. Basically this function is just going to print hello world. So we write the code. Hello world. Woo. And then go back to our regular line. And now we drop down a couple spaces, and now we're going to call this function. And the way that we call a function basically is we just type in the name of it. My function, followed by those. And so at this point, our program is actually going to start here in the first line. This is considered outside of the main program, but it's going to start here, and when it does, it's going to call this function. So it's going to look through all the different functions up here. It's going to find one that has this name and this number of parameters or arguments. It's going to do that. It's going to do it just like if we'd put hello world down here. Then we're going to print program ends. Because once we've called our function and it does its thing, then the program's going to pick right up and continue on doing what it does. Let's save it. And sure enough, we got our function call. The function did its thing, and then we moved on to the next line of code, and we got program ends just like we expected. We defined our function up here. The program actually started running right here. It did its thing, and then We continued on with the rest of our code. We got program ends out of it. So that is the basics of a function. Sometimes we need to add information to our function to make it run. Sometimes we need to add what are called arguments. If you've ever wondered why we're putting all these parentheses after print, okay, print is a function. It's a built-in function, but it's a function. So we have the word print, that's the name of the function, and then the parentheses, and then inside, in this case, we have the string of text or whatever that's going to be printed. And so here, this is called an argument, or some other languages call it a parameter. It doesn't matter what you call it. Just know that this is data that the function needs in order to run. So let's go ahead and define a new function, and we're going to still call it my function, but we are going to add a parameter. And basically, in this case, we're going to add a variable. You can add lists, you can add collections, you can add tuples, you can add objects. In this case, we're going to add a variable. And we're going to add it fname for first name. Once again, drop down a line, dent, and we're going to print name plus, and then is my name. Okay, so what we've done, we've defined a function that prints whatever value is here in the fname variable plus is my name. So we're going to then pass a first name in with our function when we call it, and at that point then it should print whatever it is. So let's drop down a few lines, start over here, and we're going to call the function, and I'm going to say Regan because that is my name. So I'll call the function and I'm passing it this value. What we should see is Regan is my name. That should be printed out. So let's save it. Oops. And sure enough, it did. So let's analyze our code. Based on our results, Regan is my name. So in our function, when we called it, Python went up here, it found the function definition, and it said, oh, I need a parameter. It came back down and said, oh, look, there's a parameter in there. That's what we're going to use. So it took that parameter and it replaced it for the variable value, or took the variable value and placed it in there. And then it went ahead and printed out that, including the last part of it, including the literal string. It printed the whole thing out. So it did exactly what we expected. Now, I could have, let me demonstrate. I could have made this a variable. Let's say I have a variable value. So I've created a variable that contains the value of my name, and I'm passing, instead of passing the string literal that we passed a while ago, I'm passing a variable that contains that value. When I print it, it still does exactly the same thing. It takes the variable that we defined, that we're passing as an argument, it puts it into the function. And notice these two variable names are not the same at all. This variable name is specific in scope to this function only. It's just a temporary variable that holds whatever we send it when we call the function. And so essentially it took the value of this variable, stuck it in there, and then it printed out what we expected it to print. So that's exactly what we expected to see. Now, we can actually have more than one variable. We separate them by commas. All right, so I have fname and lname. What we're going to do, we're going to modify it just a little bit. We're going to say fname plus, computer locked up there, and we're going to put a space in here, and we're going to put last name plus, okay, so what we should see is first name, last name is my first and last name. Only now we have two variables that we need to pass. So I'm going to create another variable here. We'll just do this with variables this time. And I'm going to do this. Okay. First name of me is Regan, last name is White. And so I'm going to do that. First name of me. All right, so now what should happen is it should take these two variables, plug them into these two holes, and print out our line as we expect it to, if I've typed everything incorrectly. Who knows? I guess we'll see. And sure enough, Regan White is my first and last name. So basically it took the value for first name, the value for last name, it plugged them into those places, and it printed out exactly what we expected it to. So we're starting to see how functions can work. It's possible that we don't know that we don't know what number of parameters or arguments that we need. It's entirely possible that we don't understand that maybe we're using an external library, and so it's possible we don't know. So what we do then at that point is we put an asterisk in front of the parameter, and we're going to do this. And so we're going to create a collection of a group of kids. There may be more than one kid. So we're going to pass a collection. So we're going to pass a collection, and we're going to take the second element. So 0, 1, 2. It'll technically be the third element in that collection. Let's get down here. Oops. First of all, let's create the collection. Pardon me. Joe. James. All right, so there is a collection of kids. Now we're going to send the function, we're going to call it my, and we're going to send it the entire thing. We're going to send it the entire collection. And so what it should do is it should go through here and pick the value in index place number 2, 0, 1, 2. So it should say the youngest child is James. Let's print that. Whoops, and I am out of range. How could I possibly be out of range? That's very strange. Did I miss one? Duh. That kind of hurts my feelings. Oh, apparently you can't pass a collection like that. I did not realize. So instead, don't make it a collection. Let's just make it a group. Let's do Fred, Joe, and James. Let's do it that way. I did not know that you couldn't pass a collection like that, but apparently, as I'm looking at the documentation here, that's what I'm seeing. So let's try it like this. See, Python documentation, we're probably going to do the next video on documentation because it's really, really helpful. And sure enough, it picked out of the group, the element in the number 2 index spot. So 0, 1, 2, it picked that out and it substituted that into our print. And what we got was the youngest child is James. So that worked kind of as expected, kind of not, because I thought that we could send it a collection, but apparently we can't send a list like that, and that would be a problem. Let's see here. Okay, probably not going to go through that. Now sometimes we want to set up a default value. If there's a game that you're building and the default weapon for a fighter is a short sword, and sometimes he's carrying a different weapon. So maybe we want to build a function for his attack, but we don't want to presume what weapon he's carrying. If he hasn't gone past a certain level, then he might just be carrying a short sword, or when we're building the character, we're going to assign him a short sword. But let's go ahead and look at how we can set up a default. Alright, so we're going to do this. And we're going to say kids equals James. Alright. And we're going to print the youngest child is, we're going to say kids, just kids. We're not going to be an index here. So, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to call my function with Fred. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to call my function with no parameter. So it should print 2 different things. One time it should print through with Fred as the youngest, and the next time it should fall off to the default because we didn't specify. So if we save that and we type, sure enough, so the first time we specified and it was Fred, so it printed off Fred. The second time we didn't specify, so it fell to the default and it printed off James. So essentially that is how you would set a default. We can use lists. In functions, but it's not as straightforward as you might think. Let's go ahead and see if we can set up a list here. All right, so we're going to define my function, and we're going to just give it one parameter of food. And in here, we're going to say for, just like a for loop, for x in food, we're going to say print x. So we're just going to print the name of the food. And then we're going to come back down here, and we're going to establish the fruits just like we did. Oops. Apples, bananas, cherries, but I almost forgot that double quote again. Cherries. Okay. So now we've established that. Let's go ahead and call it. And all we have to do as an argument is send the name of the collection or the list to the function, and it should handle it. But all all the processing has to happen in the function, which is why we messed up a while ago, it looks like. So let's go ahead and send this and see if it will print out our collection for us. And sure enough, so we got apples, bananas, and cherries. We called our function with the collection of fruits with the list. We've defined the list here. So basically what this did is my function took this group of parameters as this list, passed them up here. Notice once again that the parameter name, the variable name here, the variable name here don't have to agree. This is just a temporary variable that holds this variable. And so for each X in that, for each element inside the food list, it printed it. And then when it was done, it stopped. So basically that is how we can use a list or a collection. All right, sometimes we want to return a value. When we're using a function, we want to actually return a value. And so we're going to use the return keyword. So far, the function that we've been calling has been doing the work itself. It's just been like the print statements. We've been outputting the work that the function has done from the function. Now we're going to move that process so that we actually output the work from the main program, and we're just using the function call as more of a variable. So let's go ahead, and I think you'll see what I mean when I do this. All right, once again, defining the function. We're going to use the keyword return, and we're going to say x times 5. And that's going to be our deal, and we're going to change the value to x here. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass in an integer. Our function is going to multiply that times 5, and it's going to return it to where we called the function, but it's not going to do anything to it. So we need to print. And so we're going to call my function with a value of 3. And then we're going to call it again with a value of 2. And then we're going to call it again with a value of 50. Just because. All right. So what we should get is 5 times 3, 5 times 2, and 5 times 50. And it should be printed out down here rather than from within the function itself. This is the correct way, by the way, to do it. You want to use the return keyword, and you want it to print from here or whatever output you're doing here. You don't want to have the actual output happening up here in the function. So let's save it. And sure enough, 5 times 3 is 10, 5 times 2 is 15, 5 times 2 is 10, 5 times 50 is 250. So basically it does the same thing, but what it does is it takes this value and it returns it here and replaces the my function call with that value. And so we're printing the results of this, we're printing the results of this, and then we're printing the results of this. You definitely want to use a return keyword. That makes a lot more sense. All right, guys, I hope that wasn't too confusing. Functions are, well, they're the bones and the blood and bones of programming. Essentially, we're going to be using functions from now on, so you need to be comfortable with them. We'll be writing big functions and little functions. What you want to do is separate any isolated task. If it's a granular task that the program does, you want to separate it out into a function. In fact, if possible, if it's a task that you might do in more than one program, you definitely want to separate it out as a function. One of the keys to the type of program that we're learning is that code should be reusable. So if I write a function that connects to a database and reads from that database, I can use that in any program that requires database access. So I want to separate that out as a function. Then instead of having to reinvent the wheel, I can take my function and just copy and paste it into my program somewhere. And so functions are very handy. You're going to find that they're very useful. So, all right, go ahead, go through the video, do the work, and once you've done that, do the assignment below. Use the Start Assignment button above, turn in your work. If you have any questions, contact me through the Canvas inbox, and